This is HOA nuisance files. I did not raise my voice, I raised my evidence packet. A post hole sat open in my yard and Karen screamed that digging without approval was a violation and the daily fines were already running. I will make sure the vendor sees this. Janet Sanchez, Vice President of the Ironwood Trails Association in Grand Rapids, Michigan, stood at the edge of my property line with her laminated rule card held high like a weapon and her face twisted in fury. I had not even set a single post yet. The hole was 20 minutes old. The fence panels were still stacked on the driveway. But according to Janet, I was already in violation, and the clock was ticking on penalties I did not know existed. I work as a home warranty claims rep. I read fine print for a living. I know how to follow rules. I had spent 3 weeks reviewing the Ironwood Trails Association fence guidelines, measuring setbacks, confirming height limits, and filing my application. I had submitted drawings, paid the review fee, and waited the required 10 business days. The approval letter had arrived 2 days earlier. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. But Janet did not care about any of that. She cared about control, and I had just made the mistake of starting a project without personally notifying her first. Janet took a step closer, her gray visor casting a shadow over her eyes. "If you make me repeat myself, it gets more expensive." Her voice was low and sharp. "I do not need proof. I have paperwork and vibes." She pulled a small notepad with wet pages from her blazer pocket and flipped through it like she was reading charges at a trial. The notepad had no readable text, just smudged ink and water damage, but she held it like it was a legal document. "You dug without a pre-dig inspection. You did not mark utilities. You did not provide notice to adjacent property owners. You did not confirm setback measurements with the board. Each violation is $50 per day. You are at $200 right now, and it is only Tuesday." I felt my chest tighten. My elderly mother was staying with me while she recovered from a fall, and the stress of the last month had already taken a toll on her health. The last thing I needed was an HOA war that would drag out for weeks and create chaos in the house. But I also knew Janet was bluffing. The approval letter was in my truck. The setback measurements were marked with spray paint on the grass. I had done everything right. I just had to prove it. I walked to the truck and grabbed the approval letter, then came back and held it up. "This is the approval. It is signed. It is dated." I followed every step in the application process. Janet barely glanced at it. She waved her laminated card again and shook her head. "That approval is conditional. It does not take effect until the board verifies compliance with adjacent property setbacks. You did not provide verification. You just dug." I pointed at the spray paint marks on the ground, each one clearly labeled with measurements I had taken using the property survey I had ordered. "These are the setback marks. They are 6 inches inside the minimum. I have the survey in the truck if you want to see it." Janet did not move. She did not look at the marks. She just smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made my stomach drop. "The survey does not matter if the board has not reviewed it, and the board meets once a month. You are going to have to stop work until the next meeting, which is 3 weeks away. If you keep going, the fines double every day." She turned and started walking toward the street, then stopped and looked back over her shoulder. "Oh, and I already called the vendor. They know you are operating without full clearance. If they keep working, they are liable too." I stood there with the approval letter still in my hand, watching her walk away, and I felt the weight of what was happening settle over me like a wet blanket. This was not about rules. This was about power. Janet ran the Ironwood Trails Association like a personal fiefdom, and she had just decided I was her next target. The HOA had a so-called design compliance hotline that Janet controlled, and she wrote herself into every enforcement action. If you did not clear your project with her directly, she found a way to make it a problem. I had heard the stories from other neighbors. I just did not think it would happen to me. I pulled out my phone and called the fence contractor. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, I just got a call from someone at your HOA. She said there is a compliance issue and that I should stop work until it is cleared up." I could hear the hesitation in his voice. He was a small operation, and he could not afford to get tangled up in an HOA dispute that might cost him his license or his reputation. I took a breath and kept my voice steady. "The project is approved. I have the letter. This is harassment. If she calls you again, do not answer. I will handle it." There was a long pause. "I do not know, man. If the HOA is saying stop work, I do not want to be in the middle of it. I can come back when it is cleared up." He hung up before I could argue. I stood there in the driveway with the sun beating down and the post hole digger leaning against the fence panels, and I realized I had just lost my contractor. Janet had made one phone call and turned a simple fence project into a legal and logistical nightmare. I needed a new plan, and I needed it fast. My mortgage refinance inspection was scheduled in 2 weeks. Any active HOA dispute on record could trigger a delay or even a denial, and I could not afford that. The refi was supposed to lower my monthly payment and free up cash I needed to cover my mother's medical bills. If this dragged out, I was going to be in serious trouble. I went inside and called my friend Eric, a local paralegal who had helped me review the HOA documents when I first moved in. He picked up on the first ring. What did Janet do now? I gave him the short version: the post hole, the fake violations, the contractor scare-off, the refinance deadline. Eric listened without interrupting, then let out a long breath. "Okay. First, do not touch anything until we document what you have done so far. Take photos of the setback marks, the approval letter, the materials, everything. Second, file a complaint with the HOA management company and request a formal hearing. Make them put it in writing. Third, start pulling records. If Janet is doing this to you, she has done it to other people. We need to find the pattern." I spent the next 2 hours taking photos and measurements. I documented every spray paint mark, every setback line, every corner stake. I photographed the approval letter, the application packet, the contractor estimate, and the property survey. I took wide shots and close-ups. I made sure every image had a timestamp. When I was done, I had over 50 photos stored on my phone and backed up to the cloud. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and started drafting the complaint. I kept it short and factual. I listed the approval date, the compliance steps I had completed, and the false violations Janet had cited. I requested a formal hearing and asked for a written explanation of any additional requirements I was supposed to meet. I sent it to the management company and copied the HOA board president. The response came 3 hours later. It was not from the management company. It was from Janet. The email was short and cold. "Your complaint has been received. However, the board has determined that you missed the mandatory pre-construction hearing scheduled for last Thursday. Failure to attend a required hearing is a separate violation. You are now subject to an additional administrative fee of $200, and your project approval is suspended pending a compliance review. The next available hearing date is October 10th. All work must cease immediately." I read the email twice, then checked my records. There had been no hearing notice. I had checked my email every day for 3 weeks. I had checked the HOA website, the community bulletin board, and the physical mailbox. There was no hearing scheduled for last Thursday. Janet had invented it. She had fabricated a hearing, claimed I missed it, and used that as grounds to suspend my approval and pile on more fees. It was so brazen, so blatantly dishonest, that I almost laughed. but I did not laugh. I forwarded the email to Eric with a single line. She just made this up. Eric called me 10 minutes later. This is good. I know that sounds crazy, but this is actually good. She just gave you proof of intent. If she is fabricating hearings and charging fees for violations that do not exist, that is fraud. That is not just bad HOA management. That is actionable. We can use this. I felt a flicker of hope, but it was buried under a thick layer of frustration and exhaustion. Okay. What do I do? Eric did not hesitate. File a formal records request. Ask for all hearing notices, all enforcement actions, all fee assessments for the last 2 years. Ask for the meeting minutes. Ask for the correspondence log. Make them produce everything. If she is doing this to you, she has done it to other people, and it will be in the records. If she refuses to produce the records, that is another violation. Either way, you win. I spent the rest of the evening drafting the records request. I kept it formal and specific. I asked for copies of all hearing notices sent to residents in the last 2 years, all enforcement fee assessments, all correspondence between the board and residents regarding fence or property line disputes, and all meeting minutes where design compliance was discussed. I included my approval letter and the fabricated hearing email as attachments. I sent it to the management company, the board president, and Janet. Then I sat back and waited. The next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange notice taped to my front door. It was a stop work order, printed on Ironwood Trails Association letterhead, with no readable text but plenty of bold formatting. The notice claimed that my fence materials were blocking the sidewalk and constituted illegal dumping, and that I had 24 hours to remove them or face additional fines. The materials were not blocking the sidewalk. They were stacked neatly on my driveway, 6 feet from the curb, exactly where the contractor had left them. But Janet did not care. She was escalating. I called Eric. She is trying to force me into a corner. If I move the materials, I look like I am admitting fault. If I do not move them, she will fine me and possibly tow them. Eric was quiet for a moment. Do not move them. Take more photos. Document everything. Then file a police report for harassment. If she keeps escalating, we need a paper trail with law enforcement, not just the HOA. I did not love the idea of calling the cops over an HOA dispute, but Eric was right. This was not normal. This was coordinated harassment, and it needed to be on record. I called the non-emergency line and explained the situation. The dispatcher sounded skeptical, but she took the report. An officer showed up an hour later, a middle-aged guy with a clipboard and a tired expression. He looked at the materials, looked at the notice, and shook his head. This is not illegal dumping. This is not even close. If your HOA is claiming this is a violation, they are wrong. Do you want me to document it? I nodded. Yes, I need everything on record. He took photos, wrote up a brief incident report, and handed me a copy. If they keep harassing you, call us again. This is not a police matter yet, but if it turns into trespassing or threats, we will handle it. The officer left, and I stood there with the incident report in my hand, feeling like I had just taken a small step forward in a very long fight. But the relief did not last. That afternoon, I got another email from Janet. This one was different. It was not an enforcement notice. It was a legal filing. Janet had filed a small claims lawsuit against me, claiming I owed the HOA $800 in unpaid fines and administrative fees, plus damages for non-compliance. The filing was scheduled for a hearing in 3 weeks. She was trying to drag me into court and force me to spend time and money defending myself, all while the refinance deadline loomed and my mother sat at home wondering why the house was so tense. I called Eric again. She just filed a lawsuit. $800 in fake fines. She is trying to bury me. Eric did not sound surprised. That is her escalation pattern. She knows you have a refinance deadline. She is gambling that you will settle just to make it go away. Do not do that. Fight it. We have the records request in motion. We have the police report. We have the fabricated hearing email. When we get the HOA records, we are going to have even more. She is overplaying her hand, and she does not realize it yet. I wanted to believe him. But sitting there with the lawsuit in my hand and my mother asleep in the next room, I felt the weight of it all pressing down. I was not just fighting Janet. I was fighting the entire structure of the Ironwood Trails Association, a system designed to protect board members and punish residents who pushed back. But I also knew I could not back down. If I gave in now, Janet would do this to someone else. She had probably already done it to dozens of people. I had to finish what I started. The next day, I got a response to my records request. It was not from the management company. It was from Janet, and it was 2 sentences long. Your request is denied. The records you are asking for contain confidential resident information and cannot be released without board approval. I forwarded the email to Eric, and he called me within minutes. That is a violation of state law. HOA records are not confidential. You have a right to inspect meeting minutes, enforcement actions, and financial records. She just gave us another piece of evidence. File an appeal with the management company and the board president. Make them override her. I drafted the appeal and sent it that afternoon. I cited Michigan Nonprofit Corporation Law, the HOA bylaws, and the standard records inspection rules. I made it clear that I was not asking for personal information. I was asking for enforcement patterns, meeting minutes, and fee assessments. I sent the appeal to the management company, the board president, and every board member I could find an email address for. Then I waited. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmares and satisfying payback. 2 days later, the board president called me. His name was Greg, and he sounded exhausted. Look, I do not know what is going on between you and Janet, but this has gotten out of hand. I am going to approve your records request. You will have access to the last 2 years of meeting minutes and enforcement logs. But I need you to understand something. Janet runs compliance. She has been doing it for 5 years. If you go after her, this is going to get messy. I kept my voice calm. I am not going after her. I am defending myself. She fabricated a hearing, filed fake fines, and sued me in small claims. I just want to build a fence. Greg sighed. I will send you the records. Good luck. The records arrived the next morning. It was a massive PDF, over 300 pages of meeting minutes, enforcement logs, and fee assessments. I printed the whole thing and spread it out on the kitchen table. Eric came over that evening, and we went through it page by page. What we found was worse than I expected. Janet had been running the same playbook for years. She targeted residents who filed fence or property line applications, claimed they missed hearings that were never scheduled, piled on fake fees, and forced them into settlements or small claims court. In the last 2 years alone, she had done it to at least 8 people. The pattern was clear, and it was documented in the HOA's own records. But there was something else. Buried in the minutes from a board meeting 6 months earlier, there was a note from the management company. The note was short, but it was damning. It said that the compliance hotline had been flagged for potential misuse, and that the management company recommended an independent audit of enforcement actions. The board had voted to table the audit indefinitely. Janet had been in the room when the vote happened. She knew the management company suspected her, and she had convinced the board to bury it. Eric looked up from the documents and met my eyes. This is your trump card. The management company knows she is dirty. They tried to audit her, and the board blocked it. If you can get this in front of the HOA attorney, Janet is done. But you have to time it right. Do not show your hand until you are in a position where it will have maximum impact. I nodded. I understood. I had the proof. I just needed the right moment to use it. The next week, Janet escalated again. I came home from work to find my fence materials gone. Not moved. Gone. The panels, the posts, the bags of concrete mix. All of it had been loaded onto a truck and hauled away. There was a notice taped to my front door claiming the materials had been removed due to non-compliance with the dumping ordinance, and that I could retrieve them from a storage facility 15 miles away for a retrieval fee of $200. I stood there staring at the empty driveway, and I felt something snap inside me. This was not just harassment. This was theft. Janet had crossed a line. I called the police again. This time, the dispatcher took me seriously. That is theft. File a report. I will send an officer. The same officer from before showed up 20 minutes later, and this time he looked angry. She had your property removed without a court order? That is not legal. I do not care what your HOA says. You did not abandon this. It was on your property. This is theft, and I am writing it up as such. He took photos, wrote up a full incident report, and handed me a copy. If she tries to charge you a retrieval fee, do not pay it. This is evidence now. I called the storage facility and explained what had happened. The manager sounded uncomfortable. Look, I do not want to be in the middle of this. The woman who authorized the tow said she had HOA authority. I did not ask a lot of questions. I told him the police had filed a theft report and that the materials were evidence. He agreed to hold the materials without charging me until the situation was resolved. Then I called Eric and told him what had happened. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he laughed, and it was not a happy laugh. She just handed you a felony. Theft of property over $500. If you push this, she is going to jail. But I do not think you should push it that hard. I think you should use it as leverage. Let her know you have the police report, and watch how fast she backs down. But I did not get a chance to use it as leverage. The next morning I got a call from Greg, the board president. He sounded panicked. I just found out what Janet did with your materials. That was not authorized. The board did not approve that. I am going to make sure you get everything back, and I am going to talk to her. This has gone too far. I kept my voice steady. Greg, this is not just about the materials. This is about a pattern. Janet has been doing this for years. I have the records. I have the police reports. I have proof that the management company tried to audit her, and the board blocked it. If this does not stop, I am going to take it to the HOA attorney and the state. Greg was quiet for a long time. Then he sighed. I will call an emergency board meeting. Can you be there tomorrow night? The meeting was held in the community center, a small room with folding chairs and a projector screen. I showed up with Eric and a folder full of documents. Janet was already there, sitting at the front table with a pair of work gloves in front of her and a smug expression on her face. The other board members looked tired and uncomfortable. Greg opened the meeting and went through the agenda quickly, then turned to me. You have the floor. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. This is the approval letter for my fence project. It is signed and dated. I followed every rule in the application process. I measured the setbacks. I filed the drawings. I paid the fee. Everything was legal. Then I pulled out the email from Janet claiming I missed a hearing. This is an email from Janet Sanchez claiming I missed a mandatory hearing on a date that was never scheduled. There is no record of that hearing in the HOA calendar, the community bulletin, or my email. It was fabricated. Janet leaned forward. her face twisting. That is not how it works. You are required to confirm attendance. If you do not confirm, you forfeit your right to dispute. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes on Greg. There was no hearing to confirm. She made it up. Then I pulled out the records Eric and I had compiled. These are enforcement logs from the last 2 years. They show a pattern. Janet has targeted at least 8 residents with fake hearings, fabricated fees, and forced settlements. The management company flagged this 6 months ago and recommended an audit. The board voted to table it. Janet was in the room when that vote happened. I paused and let that sink in. Then I pulled out the police report. 2 days ago, Janet had my fence materials removed from my property and taken to a storage facility. She did it without a court order, without board approval, and without notifying me. The police have filed a theft report. The materials are worth over $2,000. That is a felony. The room went silent. Greg looked at Janet, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked down at the work gloves on the table and did not say anything. Greg cleared his throat. "Janet, do you have a response?" She shook her head slowly. "I was enforcing the rules. That is my job." I pulled out the final document. This is an internal note from the management company. It was included in the records I requested. It says, and I quote, "Enforcement actions under the current compliance officer have resulted in multiple resident complaints and potential legal exposure. The association is advised to consider independent oversight and a policy review." That note is from 8 months ago. Nothing was done. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every board member. I am not here to destroy the HOA. I am here to build a fence. But I am not going to let Janet Sanchez ruin my life because she does not like that I did not ask her permission personally. I have the evidence. I have the police reports. I have the records. If this does not stop, I am going to take it to the HOA attorney. And I am going to file a countersuit in small claims for harassment, theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And I am going to win. Greg looked at the other board members. Then, he looked at Janet. "Janet, I am going to need you to step out of the room. We need to discuss this as a board." Janet stood up slowly, grabbed the work gloves, and walked out. The door closed behind her, and I could hear her footsteps echoing in the hallway. Greg turned to me. "Give us 10 minutes. Eric and I stepped outside and waited in the parking lot. The sun was setting, and the air was cool. I could feel the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion. Eric put a hand on my shoulder. "You did good in there. That was the right move. You gave them a way out. Now we wait and see if they take it." I nodded, but I did not say anything. I was too tired to talk. 10 minutes later, Greg opened the door and called us back in. Janet was not in the room. Greg looked at me and took a deep breath. "The board has voted to freeze all enforcement actions against you pending a full policy review. We are going to hire an independent auditor to review the compliance process. Janet has been asked to step back from enforcement duties, and she is no longer authorized to contact you directly regarding this matter or any other HOA issue. Your fence project is approved, and all fines and fees are waived. We will also be reimbursing you for the cost of retrieving your materials. I am sorry this happened." I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "Thank you." Greg nodded. "There is one more thing. We have received a petition from several residents requesting a special meeting to vote on new fence and property line policies. The petition has over 30 signatures. We are going to schedule that meeting for next month. If you want to attend, you are welcome." I smiled. I will be there. Eric and I walked out to the parking lot, and I felt a weight lift off my chest. It was not over yet. The small claims lawsuit was still pending, and I still had to retrieve the materials and finish the fence. But the power dynamic had shifted. Janet no longer controlled the process. The board had stepped in, and the neighborhood had my back. The next day, I drove to the storage facility and picked up the materials. The manager apologized and waived the retrieval fee. I loaded everything onto a rented trailer and brought it home. The fence contractor called that afternoon. I heard what happened. If you still want me to finish the job, I am in. I told him I did. He showed up the next morning, and we started setting posts. 3 days later, the fence was up. It was 6 feet tall, pressure-treated wood, stained a clean gray-brown. The posts were set in concrete. The panels were level, and the setback measurements were perfect. I stood in the backyard and looked at it, and for the first time in weeks I felt like I could breathe. The small claims hearing was scheduled for the following week. I showed up with Eric and the full evidence packet, the approval letter, the police reports, the HOA records, the management company note, and the board meeting minutes. Janet showed up with her laminated rule card and a folder of printed emails. The judge listened to both sides for about 20 minutes, then stopped Janet mid-sentence. "Ma'am, I have seen enough. Your claims are not supported by the evidence. The defendant has provided clear documentation that he followed all required procedures, and your enforcement actions appear to be arbitrary and unsupported by the association's own records. I am dismissing your claim and awarding the defendant costs and fees." Case closed. Janet stood there for a moment, her face pale, then turned and walked out of the courtroom without saying a word. The judge looked at me. "I am also going to recommend that the Homeowners Association review its enforcement policies and consider oversight measures to prevent this kind of situation in the future." I nodded. "They already are, Your Honor." "Thank you." A month later, the special meeting was held. Over 50 residents showed up, and a neighbor petition that forces a vote during the meeting was submitted. The vote passed unanimously. The new policy required clear timelines for approvals, mandatory notice for all hearings, written documentation for every enforcement action, and a neutral third-party appeal process. The policy also required that all enforcement decisions be reviewed by the full board, not just the compliance officer. Janet did not attend the meeting. She resigned from the board 2 weeks later. The HOA hired an independent auditor, and the audit confirmed everything Eric and I had found. Janet had been selectively enforcing rules, fabricating violations, and collecting fees that were never authorized by the board. The management company issued a formal apology to the 8 residents who had been targeted, and the association refunded over $12,000 in improper fees. The HOA also settled my legal costs and issued a written statement confirming that my fence project had been lawfully approved from the start. I finished the refinance process without any issues. The inspection went smoothly, and the new mortgage rate saved me enough money to cover my mother's medical bills and still have a little left over. My mother recovered from her fall and moved back to her own place, and the house finally felt peaceful again. The fence is still standing. It looks great. Neighbors stop by sometimes to ask about it, and I tell them the short version. A few of them have started their own projects, and they come to me for advice on how to navigate the HOA process. I always tell them the same thing: follow the rules, document everything, and do not back down if someone tries to bully you. Janet moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. I heard she bought a condo in a different part of town, somewhere without an HOA. I never saw her again, and I am fine with that. The Ironwood Trails Association is still around, but it is different now. The new compliance officer is fair, the enforcement process is transparent, and the board actually listens to residents. It is not perfect, but it is better. I learned a lot from that fight. I learned that power without accountability is dangerous, and that even small systems like an HOA can be corrupted if no one is paying attention. I learned that keeping records and staying calm can turn a nightmare into a win. And I learned that sometimes, the best revenge is just making sure the rules apply to everyone equally. I am glad you made it to the end.